Since you have a few things to say, maybe I'll go ahead and start the meeting, David. And call to order the September 30th, 2024 Legislative Advocacy Meeting of the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. Could we have a roll call?
Director Oglesby?
Here.
Director Edwards?
Here.
Chair Adams?
Here. Thank you very much. And I will look to Mr. Stolt, who has some housekeeping things he wanted to discuss.
Well, just our only guest right now is the alternate, Karen. So as you look for public comment, there's unlikely to be any. We'll keep track of any outside attendees.
Thank you very much for that. And I'm sorry, Karen, that I didn't see you on here, but I'm glad that you're with us today. So let's see if there is any member of the public who wishes to make comment on anything that is not on the agenda today. We would have 3 minutes for people to be able to speak. I knew there was someone who expressed an interest to me earlier today, but I'm not seeing him or her.
No, Chair Adams, there are no members of the public.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'm going to close public comment and we'll move right on to the action items of the day. And the first is to consider adoption of the April 24th, 2024 committee meeting minutes. I hope Ian and Alvin, if you had an opportunity to look at the minutes.
So moved, Chair. Second.
Okay, there we go. We have a first and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Excellent. With that, we will adopt the minutes. Is there any member of the public who wishes to comment on the minutes? None. I just always feel like I need to ask people that if there's anybody out there. The invisible man could be lurking. Okay. All right. So we have no comments from the public on our item of the committee minute approval. We'll go on to our discussion items. And now we are going to be hearing various discussions from, first we'll start with the Ferguson Group on our federal legislative and the regulatory activities. Very happy to see you guys here today.
Thank you, Chair Adams. Appreciate it very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And I'll start, Roger Gwynn, again with the Ferguson Group, and I'm going to give you a little update on some of the pending priorities of the district, and then turn it over to Chris Kearney, who's listed as Roger Gwynn, also I guess on his label there. But anyway, turn it over to Chris Kearney. We'll give you an update, give you an overview of what the outlook is likely to be for Congress in the lame duck session, and then a little bit on the little election prognostication in terms of how that might impact the Congress and such. So anyway, in terms of the overall update for FY25 appropriations, that process, we currently Congress is in recess, as you would expect, and Congress is in where the government is currently operating under a continuing resolution, which was passed last week by the House and the Senate, and then signed into law on September 27th by the President. This keeps the government operating at roughly FY24 levels until through December 20th, and that's when we're certainly hopeful that there will be a resolution to the number of the many disputes between the House and the Senate, Democrats, Republicans, on FY25 spending levels. There are a couple of things that were of note too that were attached to the CR, the continuing resolution, which just basically keeps government operating at, again, at a roughly a flat level with 24. One was additional money for FEMA. The disaster relief fund under FEMA is basically run out of money, and they added $10 billion to that just to keep things operating and to allow some payments to go forward. FEMA is currently running a backlog, and you're seeing that in terms of fire assistance, wildfire response funds in the West, and certainly they're seeing it, continue to see it in the East too, from various hurricane events and flood events that have occurred. In terms of also the National Flood Insurance Program was extended as well for the frankly, I've lost track of the time. A number of times it's been extended, but I think we're well over 30 at this point that it's been extended. In terms of the district's appropriations request, as a reminder, the district had two requests for earmarked funds in the FY25 appropriations process. One was for $750,000 for a collection of projects that are under the label of Monterey Peninsula Stormwater Diversion and Recycling Project. And this, basically, that's funding for Oliver Street Stormwater Diversion Project and design work on a number of other diversions and there's another other recycling projects. Then there was $3.2 million was requested by the district for the Seaside Municipal Well Water Security Project under Environmental Protection Agency, the State and Tribal Assistance Grants account. And the good news is certainly that Representative Panetta, who is limited to just 15 community project funding requests, earmark requests in the FY25 appropriations process, he did request the full $3.2 million that the district was advocating for, and he was successful in securing $1,105,800 for this project. That's kind of an odd number, I know, but it's $1,105,800. And basically, what the Democrats did with on the committee is allocate their portion of the funds that were available to the Democrats on the for the EPA account on an equitable basis among all the members that had all the projects that were selected allocated to an even amount to each of those. And that's the reason you get kind of an odd amount there. Senator Padilla on the Senate side did request funding for Seaside as well as the $750,000 for the Monterey Peninsula Stormwater Diversion and Recycling Project. However, neither were approved on the Senate side, and but again, we remain optimistic about the likely approval ultimately of the Representative Panetta's request for Seaside, and frankly, expect that that'll be approved regardless of what happens. In all likelihood, what happens with the FY25 bill, whether or not it's approved at the end of this calendar year between now and the 20th of December, or if it gets put over to the following year. Anyway, we remain optimistic about that, certainly. And then on the Senate side, Senator Padilla and others were successful, however, in securing $60 million allocation for environmental infrastructure for the source of the account of fund from which funds would be drawn for the Monterey Peninsula Stormwater Diversion Project. And what that means basically is that if that level of funding is approved, that would create an opportunity for the district to pursue funding for the project directly working with the Corps of Engineers. We got somewhat of an uphill battle on securing the full 60 million, but certainly we'll be working in the coming days and weeks, to do what we can to try to help encourage the Senate to hold on to the 60 million and for the House to recede to that number. So it's but the House has only approved 3.5 million. So there's quite a big gap, between the two. But nonetheless, there seems to be considerable support that's growing for a higher number, something closer to the Senate number for environmental infrastructure. And again, that will create an opportunity for the district to go after funding directly with the Corps. So that's and certainly Dave is on the behalf of the district has been very, very close contact with the Corps, San Francisco District Office, and the district itself. The elected officials met with the Corps back here at headquarters on the project, the district's request, and we'll be continuing to communicate in writing to the district and certainly to the members to encourage them to and again support the higher level of funding on the Senate side.
Yeah, and I think for the mayor's purposes, I know Nisha moved on to somewhere up in the peninsula. The chief went back to doing chief work, and Craig is back on an interim basis. But the appropriation won't even be available till they, finalize a bill, as Roger mentioned, perhaps the end of the calendar year or rolled over to the beginning of next calendar year. So we will keep our eye on that to make sure that the city knows when that money is available. I think, even though the overall remaining project was about $4 million, my recollection with Nisha was that the gap was about $1 million to $1.5 million. So this may close the gap. I saw that Panetta also put your bridge project in, and it's gone through. So those would be the two to watch for the city. And then, of course, this giant disparity between the Senate at 60 million and the House at 3.5 million hopefully gets resolved to the bigger numbers, and we'll keep our eye on that just for the district's Section 219 core purposes. But the goal is to not let either of these slip through the cracks. So
That's a big discrepancy, isn't it?
Right.
So do we want to move to the quick snapshot of election potential?
Sure. Yeah, let me just real quick on just two other quick things. One is that there continues to be a lot of, I know the district's interested obviously in the Title 16 program and the caps, any sort of legislative changes that occur on that. We did provide a legislative tracker, which is in your packet. And certainly there are some pieces of legislation that will provide for one, which would provide an increase in the level of funding that would be available under Title 16 under the Bureau of Reclamation's Water Reuse Program, moving it up to 50 million. Chris Kearney is going to talk a little bit more about what's likely to occur in the lame duck in terms of water infrastructure legislation. But just note that is something that is not likely to occur to get enacted this Congress. But there has been an effort to push for an administrative decision to bump up the cap on Title 16 funding from 30 to 40 million. And Representative Panetta has been part of that whole effort as well, and a leader in that effort. So that, and Senator Padilla has as well. So those things will continue. And yes, with that, let me just turn over to Chris Kearney, who can talk a little bit about the lame duck session and the election landscape.
Just real quick on what Roger just spoke of. That's where 30 million of the Pure Water Monterey money came from. So if they did enact an increase to, let's say, to 40 million, I've talked to Monterey One Water about trying to get another application in. We've got about another year to go on construction. So, we'll pay very close attention because we've been successful there before. Go ahead, Chris.
Thanks. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for giving a few minutes. As Roger said, we've got a lot moving on the appropriations front, but it's, they're all out campaigning now, and the next sort of legislative activity we expect, they'll come back at some point in November after the election, or at least they have time slotted for that, and they have time scheduled for December. So while the continuing resolution that keeps the government running now goes through December 20th, and so no doubt the resolution of all things appropriations probably doesn't come until December 18th or 19th, depending on the outcome of the election. There are other major provisions that the committees are working on that you may hear about. One of them is a farm bill eventually that there's talk of needing to reauthorize that. And there's sometimes conservation monies related to that may be in your area. The other big thing that we're not exactly sure the timing on yet, but that there's much anticipation of, seemingly regardless of the outcome of the election, is the notion of what invariably happens every year is a large public lands and Western water package, where they essentially scoop up bills that usually starts in the Senate. This year should be no exception. The bills are typically characterized as non-controversial, bipartisan, that have cleared out of committee and been reported out of committee at least. And so it's a very kind of tried and true traditional effort to scoop that up. To the extent to which there are provisions in the ledge tracker that meet that threshold, will be in the game. And to the extent they're not, they'll at least have made it perhaps through committee and have a fresh start and an opportunity next year. So that's the one big thing that that we're watching for you is what does that package look like, and what's included on the water side. The election's outcome may affect that sometimes. If there's, a clean sweep and change of parties, folks are eager to get things like this water package and appropriations and farm bills and other things, quote unquote, cleared off the deck so they don't have it hanging over them into the next election. If there's a mixed bag, sometimes folks fight. It's always an interesting dynamic. It may come down to things as simple as who was defeated in the election and who cares to come back or not. Can they get quorums or not? So there's all kinds of interesting things that go on. Usually lame ducks end up starting with all sorts of talk that we're going to get this done in lame duck, that done in lame duck, and then invariably they go down to sort of the lowest common denominator, which is usually time-filling float bills.
Cleaning
Broad,
out their offices.
what's that?
Cleaning out their offices.
Cleaning out their offices. I've been amazed over, I've been doing this for 35 plus years now in and around Capitol Hill and the agencies, and it's always the most interesting game about like who sees it as their obligation to finish out their term, and then who moves on to other things. Senator Butler would be a perfect example of somebody to watch to see if she comes back. So in the House, they would tend to be the Senate will probably send that package over. The House will likely take it up, though there's likely some back and forth negotiations. One of the things in the House that we're watching just as a machination of the outcome of the election is what happens with the chairmanship of the House Natural Resources Committee, which is the committee that has jurisdiction over all these public lands and water bills. Under the current configuration, Republicans have the majority, Mr. Westerman from Arkansas, and Mr. Grijalva, the senior Democrat from Arizona, is the ranking member. Should the House flip, which we'll talk about in a second, that would then set up a potential situation there where Chairman Grijalva is fresh off of cancer treatments. There is some question about whether he might return in that capacity. For our purposes, Jared Huffman has all but made it very clear publicly, virtually publicly now, it's been privately known for some time, that he's keenly interested in that slot, that he's more or less been hankering for quite some time. So that is something we'll watch closely. That the leadership elections tend to happen quietly and behind the scenes, and trade publications tend to track that stuff. You don't tend to hear it out in sort of the hinterlands, for lack of a better term. But we'll certainly be watching closely what play that he makes there. The election, I think, in the interest of time, I will tell you the bottom line is, to the extent to which you've been reading this, it tends to hold true. The presidential election is a toss-up. I think the history would suggest that it will probably stay that way till the very end. Although I can sketch out a scenario where Vice President Harris, who has more room to grow in the public, as does Governor Walz, they have more room to grow in the kind of the world of public opinion in that very narrow group of independents or soft Republicans, if you will. So you could see a situation very late in the election where 2 and 3 and 4 points, or 2 points here and 2 points there, start to break in her direction. It's kind of an interesting dynamic because we effectively have two versions of incumbents. So the kind of a lot of the old school rules of thumb about, independents and uncommitted folks breaking late for the challenger. We don't really know what that looks like this year, but I think there's been so much polling out that things are likely to stay pretty close. It's likely to be literally as it was last time, something on the order of 70, 80, 90,000 folks. What do they do? How do they feel when they wake up on election day? But I do think one thing is really important. Early voting has already started in Pennsylvania as a battleground state by the first 10 days of October. Other battleground states will be voting. Arizona will be voting. Georgia will be voting. And so really we have a rolling election here before too long. So keep that in mind when you start to hear polls and poll results in states in late October. If there's not some sort of caveat about how much voting has and how many votes have been banked, I would give that just a little bit of a sort of jaundiced eye, because I think that's where polling tends tends to be sort of secondary. But at the end of the day, the vast majority still vote on election day, and it's still going to be a tight election. I think you can assume that we won't know presidentially or a lot of other things on election day. I think the admonition to pack your patience, that there'll be a variety of counts and litigation and that sort of thing will go on for a few days. Most states require certification, though, legal certification of the results within a handful of days. So we're not talking about, weeks and months, but it will be a drawn out process. Where that affects us congressionally, we think the House is probably going to end up, either side, majority Democrat or Republican, probably 4 or 5 seats, which is about where it is. The Democrats' majority, interestingly enough, in part runs through probably California. Michelle Steele and Young Kim and Mike Garcia, all Republicans in and around the Orange County area, have had targets on their back for the last 3 elections. Even in a good Republican year, they all were very, very close. There were races in the Central Valley. John Duarte was in the Central Valley, was the last election called. He won by 547 votes, and it was about 3 weeks after the election before his seat was decided. There are also seats in Long Island where ranking the senior Democrat Hakeem Jeffries from New York is very, very keen to reclaim 2 seats on Long Island and 1 in the Hudson Valley north of New York City. Candidate quality and candidate recruitment, the opponents of those folks varies. Some of the folks in the Republican candidate or incumbents, in some cases, they have very competitive races with high quality candidates in Long Island, for example. But up in the Hudson Valley, Mike Lawler, who's been very visible in carving out his own identity, kind of has a candidate that's a bit out there. And so then in the Senate, same sort of thing. It's all but 50-50, we think at this point, at least, because West Virginia is likely to go Republican. There are always, and in the House and the Senate, there are always races people are not watching. You'll hear about Ohio, you'll hear about Montana a lot, especially, but keep an eye on Florida and Texas. Yes, it's very unlikely that in a presidential year they'll flip, but the Republican incumbents in both of those states have their hands full with challengers. And my favorite sleeper in the Senate is in Nebraska, where the incumbent Republican has her hands full with an independent candidate who, while he leans Democrat, has really held his own in the center and is raising a lot of money and is kind of below the radar. So when it all said and done, for our purposes, we're talking about slim majorities across the board. So we'll plan for that, and we'll want friends across the board no matter what. But it will be an interesting election week, not necessarily election night. So for our purposes, we'll stay tuned and be engaged and be ready to rock with whoever comes up on top.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's
A
really,
lot going on.
there is a lot going on. There's no question about it. And it's always interesting to get your perspective on what lies ahead. So I'm going to start tracking Nebraska now. It's
Yeah.
sort of like football, right?
I mean, it wouldn't, if it was a lock, it wouldn't be a sleeper, right? So we'll see how it goes. But it's
Yeah.
it's shaping up to be a very interesting race, kind of below the radar, at least at this point, a month or so out.
Good. Thank you very much for that. Do
Sure
you
thing.
think that Jared Huffman has much of a chance at all? Should we succeed?
It's a fantastic question. I think it depends in part on a couple of things. I think it depends on whether it's ranking member or chairman. I think if he's the senior Democrat, there may be more, especially if it's close, there may be more interest in drawing the contrast with Republicans and a little bit of the sharpness that Jared so eloquently gives and gets. If it's chairman, I think you could argue that Grijalva isn't going to make the argument of returning back to that, but Huffman could say, fresh start and new leadership. I think a wild card that nobody likes to talk about in Washington, and it happens a lot, and it happened in the Republican race for Speaker when Steve Scalise was in the mix, is what do people think of Grijalva's health? He's finished his cancer treatment, and no one wants to, of course, talk about that. And everyone wants to be respectful, and no one wants to, have that be a factor in their decision making. But if they're in the minority, and Donald Trump is in the White House, and there's a close minority, a gap there of just a few seats that potentially, depending, as we've seen in this Congress, if you start the Congress with a 5-seat majority or a 6-seat majority, by no means does it potentially stay that way. Republicans ran for about 6 months with the single vote majority due to a variety of things. And if it's a Republican majority, do House members that are Republicans get picked off to go into Donald Trump's administration, which is kind of what happened with Biden. So I think the wild card in it, those are always factors that people will take into consideration, and those you can kind of plus or minus, and we have to wait to see. I think the wild card and the intangible that no one has any way of knowing, because it's, you know, it'll be within the caucus, and it'll be every kind of individual person in the leadership who makes those cast those votes, will be, you know, where is his health at the end of the day. And I think that'll be an intangible that my gut tells me Huffman wins. If Huffman makes a run, he's an organized, disciplined, effective speaker. He's an effective jouster with Republicans. He draws bright contrast on things like ESA. I think if you're the Democratic caucus and you're looking for, you know, a fighter, and you look at somebody who's also, you know, played that acting role when Grijalva was out sick these last several months, he's kind of already done a little bit of the incumbency of that, so he can make that argument. I've worked in and around with Jared Huffman as Roger for a very, very long time, and he is a force. He is a force of nature and a force to be reckoned with. And if he puts his mind to this, I'm not sure Grijalva and his allies are up to the challenge. So we'll see how it all plays out.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, that would be pretty interesting to have him in that role.
Yes,
Very-
yes,
Yeah.
it would be. He loves salmon.
He's very
He loves-
water knowledgeable too. I mean, he's studious.
He is. No, he is incredibly, sometimes too smart in some respects, but he has I will say, he has had one thing to be aware of, is he had a bill a couple of Congresses ago that was was very salmon focused. So much so that it sort of he established these designated salmon strongholds, he called them, essentially designated areas that sort of overrode the Fish and Wildlife Service and others, and would have essentially established safe havens for salmon, to the exclusion of economic interests and agriculture interests and water interests and the like. And it actually got a hearing and got some traction. And it wasn't so much the notion of protecting salmon that obviously is a great interest. It really wasn't very fleshed out in a lot of ways, and it really caused a lot of angst among a lot of water users, particularly in parts of, you know, across the state, frankly. So were he to become chairman, I think that bill comes back, and I think we'd want to certainly engage with him, you know, actively about sort of just the nuances of that before it got too much traction. So that's certainly something we'd be watching right away.
Who knew?
His
Salmon.
district covers almost the entire North Coast, if not the entire North Coast of California. So, you know, from Marin, Sonoma up.
Yeah.
And so he's got the Russian, he's got the eel, he's got the elk, he's got all these salmon runs, coastal rivers. So, yeah.
There's an interesting, I was looking at his district, and there's like it kind of flips over a little bit. I don't know if he's at the very top of the district. And he heads east. And it looks like there's a little block that was cut out of his district, and I don't know if that was something intentional or what that's all about. But
Yeah, yeah, I'm not sure either. Actually, I'm not sure. I think that could have been up in that area. They've got such a, you know, they did a couple of years ago, the district that some of those Central Valley districts got. Josh Harder's district is kind of an amalgam of old districts, and Duarte's and Harder are sort of, you know, amalgams of each other kind of thing. And even David Valadeo, who's also somebody who is high on the Democrats list for Target. So that whole area, so it may have had some even more northern cascading impacts in terms of what they picked off to try to deal with those districts as well.
oh, thank you for all of that. So, does anyone have any questions or comments on the report today from the board, from our committee?
No. Sound good to me.
Mr. Mayor?
No questions. Excellent report.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Is there any member of the public, invisible or present, who would like to ask a question or make a comment on the report?
No, no, Chair Adams. It's still Karen Paul.
Okay, thank you so much. Then I will, we'll just accept the report with a great deal of thanks and appreciation and move now on to our legislative status and bill tracking from Arriaga. John.
Yeah, thank
Hey,
you.
Thank you so much. Well, we'll go ahead and get started with the state legislative report, probably the last one for this year. And today is actually the last day for the governor to sign or veto bills. And we'll have a complete rundown of all that shortly after. I think we'll have a end of the year report sometime in November for the chair and the board. But the legislature actually adjourned at the end of August 30th, for the remainder of the year. And the legislature will actually return for organizational purposes on December 2nd. The caveat to that, though, is that the governor, during the last hours of the session, did call for a special session, to which the assembly has gone ahead and moved forward with the organizational portion of that. They've actually had a number of hearings on that. And this all has to do with the gas pricing and so forth, trying to set up some type of limits as to how much and how often the gas companies can go up prices at the tank, at the gas stations and so forth. So that's in the process. The Senate, on the other hand, decided to hold off from actually calling for a special session. They've decided to, Senator McGuire has said that he will work with the governor and with Speaker Rivas as far as the hearings that go on and what they might come up with before the end of this special session. But that's ongoing, so we'll keep you posted as far as that goes. The last couple of weeks of the session, I think when they came back from their recess in July, they indicated at that time, the speaker did, that there would be a lot of focus on climate change and legislation along those lines. There were a couple of other issues that came up during the last couple of weeks of the session. But all in all, a lot of those things didn't come to pass. And they're pretty much quiet for the remainder of the year. Having said that, Lori is going to give a little bit more of a report on where we're at with the budget and the specific legislation, and I'll come back and talk a little bit about the climate change issue that did make its way through the session. Lori?
Okay, so we hadn't had a meeting since the budget. I think everyone was, expecting the doom and gloom, but he kind of did what we predicted. He delayed, deferred, reduced, and borrowed. We have a $297 billion budget. It is a structural deficit, 2-year deficit of $56 billion. And again, this is the one governor that is incredibly frustrating in his multi-year budgets of trying to narrow down what actually a 2024 and 25 budget looks like. And so when they're talking about deferrals, is that he has promised money in outer years. I mean, we can use broadband, we can use the climate change and the zero emission vehicles and whatnot. And so what he's doing is he's basically pulling back those money, in particular around water and climate. He is going to be hoping that the climate bond is going to bail him out of some of those promised funds. But we're also seeing, especially with local agencies and governments, are the clawbacks of that. These were monies that were awarded in grants, loans, etc., and the ink is not on the paper, and that they are pulling these funds back. We looked at around $16 billion in cuts. A chunk of this actually came from the state itself and took all their vacant positions, which is about 8%. But it kind of goes in line to the legislation that we opposed of the number of vacant positions. So they just wiped them out, as well as just deferring payday from June 30th to July 4th. That was a savings of $2.3 billion for one day. But local government and agencies on the whole were spared, especially in housing and homeless programs. corrections took a very, very large hit, which they are still fuming about. And so again, we're going into this January with a 56 billion, and that is not going to be including any other deficits that could occur during 2025. So it's going to be very interesting in the beginning of January of where this governor plans on going with the existing dollars we have, where the LAO is. Well, actually, you know, I think you guys are very well aware is that they were well over $30 billion in difference in measuring and estimating the deficit. You know, even though they passed the budget, who knows who's true now? I think we'll kind of find out come January of what we're looking at. So that is where we are there. There was no big, huge, mind-blowing legislation in terms of climate and water. As I said, he really stayed off of that, hoping that the climate bond that's going to be on the ballot in November is going to backfill that. So that's where we are with the budget as of today. Just see if there are any questions.
Do you know whether or not what the outcome is looking like for the climate bond?
There hasn't been any formal polling, but PPIC kind of had an informal. It looks good, Supervisor. Water bonds and climate bonds have always done well in California because of our volatile. We always know someone that's affected by it. You know, even if in Sacramento of, you know, fighting for our lives and 10 days of 116 heat and, you know, the floods and whatnot, because it's so tangible upon our lives, they really do poll well. When we met, John and I met with the speaker in early January, and he basically said the state has about $20 billion in bonding capacity left. And there are 2 bonds on the ballot for $10 billion each.
Wow.
Education bonds, unfortunately, do not poll as well. You know, not a lot, everyone has kids or their kids are grown, and, you know, they'll, you know, have Mello-Roos or paying for their own property taxes. And why do I have to do more? And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we shall see. There are a lot, you know, we have 10 initiatives on the ballot. Some will directly affect the budget, like Prop 35. That's the Medicare organization tax that we've been having for years. And it's basically all the health plans tax themselves, which, let's be real, they tax us, to backfill a lot of the Medi-Cal provider rates, et cetera. But the government has been using that money to backfill the general fund, and they are not too pleased with it. So they put some constrictions. So that's anywhere from $3 to $5 billion a year. So if this goes through, let's tack that onto the addition of the split 56. So it'll be very interesting on where these lie. And but we are, again, back to your original question, we're optimistic about the climate bond.
Thank you for that.
No.
Any questions from my other committee members?
No
Ms.
questions from me. No
Okay.
questions.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so attached, you also have your legislative track, and just, I don't know if you have it on color. Gray means that the bill is no longer moving, it is gone, and it will maybe come back in another lifetime. Green means it's signed. Kind of the orangish is we are still waiting. He has 8 hours and 31 minutes to either act or not act on these bills. But there are few particular bills that I would like to discuss, and those are ones that we took a position on, and one that is going to kind of rear its ugly little head in kind of a pattern that we are seeing in developer impact fees, et cetera, and housing and local governments. But we'll start with the first one, which is AB 2257. So basically, this bill provides that if a local agency complies with, you know, the specified exhaustion of, you know, procedures to remedy fee assessments adopted by a local agency, and this is in terms of the stormwater Prop 218, then a person or entity that has not timely submitted to that local and agency a written objection is prohibited from bringing judicial action and proceeding alleging non-compliance with some of the provisions. So basically what this is, it's basically to establish these requirements to kind of cut off all these angles where someone could exhaust legal remedies against local agencies in regards to Prop 218. This is sponsored by Aqua, and we have supported it, and it was signed by the governor. The next bill is AB 2302 by our very own Assemblywoman Addis. Just kind of going on this and backtracking, you know, since COVID and all we have seen a lot and supported and tracked and whatnot. A lot of these bills around open meetings, teleconferencing and whatnot. I'm here to tell you that those days are gone. The legislature is clamping down on any local agency meeting remotely. They want to get back to basically what it was. You have the newspaper Publishers Association leading the charge with ACLU. The only bill, this is one of them, and it's on the quasi outside, but the only other bill that got in there is that a local agency would be able to meet under specified circumstances if the meeting was pertaining to cybersecurity. That is it. There were a lot of other bills that just did not make it out. But this particular bill, which we did support, basically tweaks the limits of the number of times a member of a legislative body can participate remotely in meetings for just cause or emergency circumstances. So this kind of like tweaks all the provisions that were allowed under last year's AB 2449, or I'm sorry, 2023's 2449s. And so and you can see it through the subdivisions A, B, and C. They did increase it and tweak it a little bit there. So just because of flexibility, again, we supported the bill. The next one is AB 2561 McKinner, and this is kind of goes back to what I was saying about the vacancies. And this was a highly contentious bill. It's big labor versus all local governments. It was essentially a nasty fight, and it requires a public agency to prevent the status of vacancies in recruitment and retention if it goes above a 10% threshold before the governing board. Before, it had a lot more strict requirements in there. This is just one of, hey, you have to have a meeting on it. It entitles the unions to, or the whoever is representing the employees to make a presentation during this public presentation of where they're at. Again, we're going back to COVID of high vacancy rates, and the public sector is having an increasingly hard time competing with the private. People want to work from home. Private may offer more salary and whatnot. So you see a lot of public agencies, across the board, regardless of its geographical location or the amenities that they have, that all of them are well above a 10% vacancy rate, just like the state is. And mind you, this does not apply to the state. They made that very clear. We did take an opposed position on this. However, it was signed by the governor. It was incredibly watered down. Some people will say it's a victory. It is what it is. It's another onerous, non-refundable or non-reimbursed state local mandate on local agencies, and that's how they see it.
Yeah, we took our opposed position because as a small organization, you could be without 3 positions filled and be over the 10%. And so for us, we felt it was a very impractical rule, but we'll just hope that no one attempts to enforce when we go through phases like that when we've got a bunch of positions open.
Yeah, and the fact that it went to all, you know, that we were trying to work on negotiations, not only with the county, but the cities as well as Aqua, of like, you know, shouldn't this apply to local agencies with employees of 100, 200, whatever that magic number is, and not have to go these small agencies, and we just couldn't get it through. The last bill is SB 937 by Senator Weiner, and Dave and I wanted to put this on here of just kind of the trend that we are going to be seeing. There were a lot of bills, and this one did get through. Of there is a fight in housing between developers and local governments, that the problem with building so much housing is not, you know, inflation of cost and whatnot. It is essentially the local governments imposing these exorbitant impact fees and developer fees before occupancy. And so, you know, the developers, CBIA, went to the governor saying, hey, we are in a housing crisis. We need to do this. So basically, according to the author, he says this helps address concerns by delaying the payment of development fees imposed by local governments until the certificate of occupancy is issued. So basically, rather than charging on the back end, the developers want it to when they can basically get their money up front. They may not, but this is the kicker, the governments may not charge interest rates on any deferred fees. Further, it provides developers with a much needed, and this is wiggle room by extending housing entitlements prior to January 1, 2024 and set to expire on before 2025. So by 18 months, it's basically, you know, extending those entitlements. This would, we're going to start seeing a lot of bills like this, as I said, going after the development fees, the impact fees, the service, the connections, all of that. That they are the developers have said that local governments and agencies are not the problem, and that is why the housing has stalled. So we took no position on this. This was highly contentious, and again, it was signed by the governor. And
although we took no active position, generally speaking, we oppose. We have to reread the entire final legislation with a better understanding, because this is our capacity fee. So when a builder comes in and pulls their water permit in order to perfect their building permit, we do charge them an impact fee. And previously, kind of in the pre-Pure Water Monterey era, we actually thought maybe we should lower it because, you know, it increases every year with CPI. But then we realized, you know, we spent $18 million on Pure Water Monterey. We spent $6 million on a new treatment building at Aquifer Storage and Recovery. And we funded a lot of these through our prior reserves. You know, we didn't collect enough water supply charge, and now we've lost the water supply charge. So the buy-in to our past projects has been the capacity fee that we assess at the time you pull a water permit. So we're not super keen with delaying it until you get a certificate of occupancy. So we'll be watching it very closely to see if how it will impact us, if at all. But if they go through with it, you know, some of these projects take 3 to 4 years, and it'll also create administration penalties trying to keep track of who's come in, who still owes money, and so forth. So it'll be interesting.
You didn't have that one in the tracker, did you, Lori?
No, we had no position on it. These were basically emails going back and forth between Dave and I, when it was a gut and amend. And it was a last minute gut and amend, and he and I discussing it. We wanted to put it on, to discuss it in the memo.
Yeah, it didn't exist last time we met. It was a total gut and amend. It is opposed by CASA, which is the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, and by CMUA, which is the California Municipal Utilities Association. And as I mentioned, Aqua also took a position opposing it, but I don't think they joined in a coalition. I think just on their own.
No, yeah, it was about a lot of local governments, the special districts, the counties, the cities, school administrators, park districts, the unified school district, and of course, you know, the California YIMBY and Housing Action Coalition are the sponsors. So this is very much, and Cal Chamber, of course, and the building industry, the chamber, and it's just, this is what it's getting down to is, they're going after local agencies and local governments as they are the villains. They're the ones that are not keeping up with the arena numbers. They're the ones that are shutting down housing projects. And that's why we have streamlined, you know, fast track housing, especially in high transit areas. And we're going to start seeing a lot of these fees start getting pushed aside and tweaked with as we move forward.
Yeah.
Oh, good report. You know, personally, I think AB 2302, Don Addis's, that's going to be really helpful. You know, those of us just at the local level, at the county level, with other committee members, you know, it's tough. You know, things come up, you know, we've got a lot of people that are on statewide and county and national boards, and you can't just miss a meeting for, you know, you know, it just has made it difficult.
Yeah, and a lot of those, and a question for you, I'm sure a lot of those that if you miss two, that you are removed.
That's it. Yes, that's correct.
So and that was one of the arguments of, you know, we talk about participation, but this is actually hindering participation, especially those that, you know, are in, you know, very specific circumstances.
Yeah, no, I think this is a good bill. I'm glad that the governor signed it.
Yep.
We also got one signed last week that provided greater local control for oil and gas drilling. So I think downtown Monterey is now pretty much in clear control of their future on oil and gas drilling.
Isn't that good? Any other comments or questions from my other two committee members or our alternate?
None for me.
All right, it's going back to John.
Okay.
I'll just add on to what Lori already said about Proposition 4, and that's on the Aqua. You know, when they went through the process of the committee deciding whether they were going to support it or oppose it, there was actually a lot of talk there about supporting the bill, because even though it's nowhere near the 20 billion plus that the Aqua was hoping that the water bill, the climate measure might look like, and have more money in it for water, the Aqua decided just to take a neutral position because there was a part of the board or that particular committee that said, you know, we need to send a message that, you know, this is the second time around that we got nowhere near the amount of dollars for water that we wanted. So they decided to go ahead and take a no position on the bill. But other than that, I think Lori pretty much covered the bill and where it lies right now, and that it leads more toward you know, a positive look at it by the voters. You know, you have your usual suspects like the Howard Jarvis Association that, you know, oppose it just on fiscal issues, but not necessarily on the merit of the bond. So that's all I have to add to it.
Great, good. Any other comments that from our state at all? The state perspective?
No, just that I want to add that you may recall we had taken language to the legislative LAO's office, I guess, for legal review on our LAFCO situation. and Senator Laird
Mhm.
decided ultimately not to support it because of confusion among committee members as to whether the appeal that CalAm filed would actually resolve any of the issues or not. So we're going to track this into early January, where we're at with both the appeal as well as, you may recall, the demurrer in front of Judge Vallarta was about the same issue. If it looks like the issue of latent powers is continuing to be a barrier to movement on Measure J, on the acquisition, then we may make one last attempt to get favorable special legislation introduced in the February timeline after the first of the year. So stay tuned on that one.
Got it. Thank you for that. Any other comments?
I think we're all good.
Good. Okay. Well, then that brings us to our other items, agenda item, which is to suggest any items that we want to place on future committee agendas. Anybody have any burning desires?
Just for me, any updates on any future water for ASR? If we can find some water out there to either buy or whatever for ASR. So that's mine.
Yeah, and I also saw that the Seaside Replenishment Ad Hoc Group is meeting next week, I think.
Yeah, I think it's next
Tuesday.
Wednesday.
Yeah. And if there's any form of a legislative solution there, then we'll elevate that in this committee.
Good. Okay. Let's see. Have we lost our Washington folks?
Yeah, I think well, I see no Roger's still there.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad you are, Roger, because this is my last meeting of the Legislative Advocacy Committee for my whole tenure here. And I just wanted to thank you specifically. You and Chris have always just been so gracious when we come back to Washington for different meetings. I've enjoyed it so much. And I really want to thank you both, and John and Lori as well. Always great to come to Sacramento and work with you. And of course, the committee members and our staff as well. This is such a serious area. And I think it's the area that we can do the most good in. I mean, we can accomplish so much more with the stroke of a pen from a bill being signed than the years it takes for, public education or trying to turn the battleship as it stands. But I just wanted to say thank you so much. It's really been a great pleasure and an honor to work with you all on these really critical and important issues that we face here in our county. With that, any other final comments from anyone before we adjourn? Great. Okay, well, thank you.
so much.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you,
Thanks, Supervisor.
Supervisor. Yeah,
Oh,
we really
Thank
appreciate
you.
your
Thank you so
service, your
much.
public
Thank you.
service and everything.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for a good meeting.
thank you. Okay, great. I'll see you guys later then. We're
Take
adjourned.
care.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.